The carriage wheels clattered sharply against the slick cobblestones of Grosvenor Square, jolting from a sudden stop. Rain splattered the black lacquered panels, and steam hissed from the nostrils of the lathered horses. London's twilight, dim and damp, settled like soot over the city, clinging to gas lamps, rooftops, and shoulders. Yet the woman who stepped down from the carriage defied the gloom. She wore no veil, no hat, no gloves. Instead, her raven-black hair tumbled freely, wet with mist and falling down her back like river silk. She was barefoot in delicate beaded slippers and wrapped in a thick fur cloak that brushed the cobbles as she moved. Around her neck hung bronze amulets, etched with swirling Eastern script. The scent of cloves and wild sage lingered in her wake. The streets froze. Footmen paused mid-step. A baker's boy halted his deliveries. Even the wind seemed to hush as she turned her face to the Whitmore estate. Inside the tall windows above, a lace curtain stirred. James Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore name and fortune, stood beside her. His gloved hand took hers, reverently, and placed it in the crook of his arm. His coat was trimmed in sable, his boots polished to a military gleam, but there was something restless in his eyes, like a man standing between duty and desire, and knowing which way he'd fall. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that didn't belong in these streets. It belonged to campfires and caravans, to wind-carved cliffs and blood-stirring music played beneath stars. He'd met her in a crumbling borderland between Austro-Hungary and the old Ottoman trails. Her people had no home, only roads. She had saved his life after a failed diplomatic envoy was ambushed by thieves. James awoke in a healer's tent, her hands smoothing crushed herbs across a wound near his ribs. His breath had hitched. She hadn't looked up. And now she was his betrothed. But London was no borderland. And Lady Clarissa Whitmore was no grateful traveler. The doors of the estate swung open before they knocked. Servants in charcoal livery bowed low but cast sidelong glances. One maid forgot herself and gasped before vanishing behind velvet curtains. Clarissa's steward approached with the rigidity of an executioner, nodded to James, then gave Liala only a glance before turning sharply and guiding them inside. The hall was immense. Dark walnut floors gleamed beneath gaslit chandeliers, and an enormous painting of Lord Whitmore, deceased, loomed over the hearth, flint-eyed and judging. Liala's gaze drifted to the fire. She saw no warmth in it. And then she was there. Lady Clarissa descended the stairs in a gown of mourning black, though her husband had died 3 winters ago. Not a single strand of silver marred her coiled hair. She wore a cameo at her throat and frost in her voice. "You've brought her," she said, lips barely moving. "I see." James smiled too brightly. "Mother, may I present? I know who she is." Clarissa's eyes swept over Liala like a scalpel. She did not curtsy. She did not offer her hand. She stood as one might before a disobedient hound, calculating where to strike first. Liala met her stare with quiet boldness. "You must be very brave," Clarissa said. "Or very foolish," Liala replied, her accent thick but her English clear. Clarissa's nostrils flared. Indeed. They dined in tight-lipped civility that evening. The great dining hall, built for 40, held 4 chairs in use. James tried to fill the silence with tales of his travels, of riding through the Carpathians, of how Liala danced like firelight at a wedding celebration. But his voice trailed as Clarissa picked at her food with surgical precision, her eyes never leaving the foreign woman at her table. "Does she use utensils?" Clarissa murmured after Liala delicately ate a fig with her fingers. "She does," Liala said, unfazed, and lifted her fork. James forced a smile. "She speaks 7 languages. She reads Latin and Arabic." Clarissa dabbed at her lip. "How quaint." Later, as the storm pounded the windows and the fire guttered in the parlor, Liala walked the halls alone. The portraits on the walls scowled down at her, grandfathers in red coats, women in pearls and waistcoats, each judging her with painted stares. She passed a room where muffled laughter erupted. Servants. One called her a savage. Another made the sound of a drumbeat. She paused, looked through the keyhole, and turned away without a word. She found a small conservatory at the rear of the house. Overgrown. Forgotten. She knelt in the soil and ran her fingers over a dead rose bush. "Too much pruning," she whispered. "You starved them." Clarissa's voice cut through the glass behind her. "I had them trimmed last spring. They were vulgar in their sprawl." "Vulgar things survive," Liala murmured. Clarissa stepped forward, the tap of her heels sharp as teeth. "James will come to his senses." Liala looked up. "And if he doesn't? I'll see to it he does." Clarissa's voice was velvet over steel. "Men are not guided by love. Only legacy." A week passed. Liala's presence became a rumor in every salon, a scandal in every drawing-room. Some thought her Egyptian. Others Romani. Whispers of witchcraft followed her like smoke. She wore no corset, no powder, and walked barefoot in the garden. She sang to the birds. One evening, she cured a stablehand's fever with crushed bark and boiled root. The next day, Clarissa demanded she see the family physician for an evaluation. James refused. For now. Each day, he split himself, half in Parliament, half in defense of Liala. But the pressure mounted. Letters arrived in perfumed envelope. Invitations were withdrawn. A seat at the opera vanished. One morning, a note arrived. Lady Helen of Devonshire, young, wealthy, well-bred, expressed her condolences that James had lost his way in the woods. Clarissa left it, opened, on his desk. That night, Clarissa invited a dozen guests to dinner without informing either of them. Liala appeared in a crimson dress embroidered with thread she herself had stitched, symbols of protection and freedom. Her dark skin, luminous and proud, gleamed under the chandeliers. Lady Portingale asked her if she'd ever eaten a scone before. Lord Eddington asked if she'd been purchased or promised. Someone called her exotic. Another touched her hair. Liala smiled politely. She never touched her wine. Her answers were calm. But beneath the table, her hand trembled. When the topic turned to empire and conquest, someone asked what her people thought of British benevolence. Liala said, "We remember. Fires. Chains. Bibles held like blades." The table went quiet. Clarissa's smile froze. After the guests departed, Clarissa poured herself brandy and stared into the fire. "She is poison," she said aloud, not to anyone in particular. "You've shamed our name." "She's the only honest thing in this house," James said. Clarissa turned. "You'll thank me one day. I'd rather die first." She watched him storm off and said nothing. The next day, James was summoned to Whitehall for a week-long review. He kissed Liala softly before leaving. She watched his carriage vanish through the rain. That night, her room was locked. The key turned from the outside. Food arrived on a silver tray. Cold. Untouched. A maid refused to meet her eyes. A guard stood silently in the hallway. Liala whispered in Romani to herself. She sat cross-legged on the carpet and listened. The walls told stories. The floorboards carried echoes. She was being erased. Hidden. Caged. When she tried the window, she found the latch bolted shut with iron nails. On the third day, she pressed her ear to the door and heard Clarissa's voice. "She will eat or she will weaken. Either way, she will bend." A pause. Then the voice of the physician. "She is proud. Pride can be broken." That night, Liala took the silver spoon from her tray and bent it against the leg of her bed until it cracked into two jagged halves. She placed one beneath her pillow. She tied the other with thread into the lining of her dress. On the sixth day, the guard grew careless. She sang to him through the door. Slowly. A lullaby from a place no Englishman could name. On the seventh day, he responded. "I know that song," he said quietly. "You do not," she replied. He slipped a note under the door. "Your James returns at dawn." Liala waited by the door. She did not sleep. When the lock turned at sunrise and James stood there, hair wild with travel, fury in his chest, she stepped into his arms without a word. He looked at her face, pale, thinner, fire dulled but not extinguished. "What did she do?" he whispered. "I told you she would choose war," Liala said. "Now we must decide how we fight it." James turned, and the hallway behind him grew brighter with morning light. But down the corridor, behind velvet curtains and gilded frames, a shadow moved. Watching. Smiling. Clarissa always played the long game. And she had only just begun. A weak winter sun filtered through the parlor windows, washing the walls in pale gold that could not warm the chill between mother and son. James stood near the hearth, his coat still damp from the street, his boots tracking faint mud across the rug his father once prized. He had come home early. Parliament had recessed unexpectedly, and the carriage had raced through the fog like a man trying to outrun a feeling he hadn't yet named. Liala sat by the fire, silent. Her cheek bore a faint bruise, not from violence but from the hard edge of her bed frame where she'd leaned too long in sleep, curled like a hunted thing. She did not rise when he entered. She did not even speak at first. The only sound was the distant drip of melting frost from the eaves outside. James crossed the room and knelt before her. What did she do? She met his eyes. There was no storm in them, not yet. Only the distant calm of someone who'd crossed a desert barefoot and refused to fall. She taught me what a cage looks like when gilded in inheritance. He sat back on his heels, throat tight. She said you were resting. That you needed time. I did not need the door locked, nor the windows nailed, nor the doctor she sent with his little glass bottles and his words like padded chains. James looked toward the door, as though Clarissa might manifest from the shadows. She will answer for it. No, Liala said softly. You will. Later that evening, he confronted his mother in the music room. She sat at the piano, striking chords not for melody but for control. Her back was straight, her spine like tempered steel beneath velvet. You locked her in, he said without preamble. Clarissa's fingers stilled. I ensured she would not embarrass herself. Or us. She is not your prisoner. She is not your equal. She stood, her voice quiet but carved from stone. You've risked your entire legacy on a whim, James. A moment of lust disguised as love. You call it honor. I call it self-destruction. James stepped forward. She is stronger than any woman I've met. Clarissa walked past him, brushing the edge of his coat with her fingers. Yes, she said, her voice almost tender. But strength in a wild thing is dangerous when mistaken for suitability. He turned. You want her gone. Clarissa turned, too, the light catching her eyes like polished glass. I want my son back. James stared at her. Then you'll have to kill her. A beat of silence. Clarissa smiled faintly. That can be arranged. He didn't sleep that night. He stood at the window of his study, staring at the garden below, the old rose beds left untended since his father died. Liala had gone there in the mornings, speaking softly to dying vines as though coaxing breath back into corpses. By morning, Liala was gone from her room. Not stolen. Not taken. Simply gone. James tore through the manor, calling her name. Servants shrugged. One mentioned seeing her in the early hours, barefoot in her red shawl, slipping past the west gate. He found her in the garden, the forgotten one, hidden behind the stables. The roses there were not ornamental, not trimmed and obedient. They were wild, overgrown, thorned with a vengeance. Liala knelt among them, hands in the soil, hair tangled with dew. I dreamed of home, she said as he approached. Of the river banks, the silver poplars, the way the moon danced on water when we sang. I woke with the taste of ash on my tongue. He crouched beside her. Come back inside. This is the only place in this house not soaked in lies. She showed him her hands. Soil blackened her nails. Thorns had scored her wrist. They thrive here. In the forgotten dark. He said nothing. He only took her fingers in his, brushing away the blood with the edge of his cuff. But even then, his silence made her heart ache. Clarissa invited a physician the next day. A reputable man. Pale as milk. Educated. calm. He asked Liala questions about her dreams, her feelings, her episodes. She answered with poise, but every reply was a challenge. When asked if she heard voices, she said yes, the voices of a house built on dead men's greed. When asked if she feared for her safety, she smiled and said not her own. After he left, she found James in the library. He thinks I'm mad. He thinks you're displaced. Confused. I am not confused. James set his book down. He says you might benefit from quiet, structure, peace. A prison. A rest home. Liala's eyes narrowed. And do you believe him? He hesitated. And that hesitation was worse than any blow. That night, Clarissa summoned her solicitor. Papers were drawn. Recommendations written. The asylum carriage waited in secret behind the estate. When they came for Liala, she did not scream. She did not fight. She looked to James and said, "Now I know. You do not need to wound a woman to break her. You only need to let someone else do it." She was taken in the dead of night, bundled in blankets like a fragile patient. The asylum doors closed behind her with the sound of finality. Inside, the world was pale. White walls, white gowns, white noise humming from lamps that never flickered. She was given a name, Miss V. A number, Patient 112. And a room, small, windowless, stripped of all comfort but a ticking clock that told no truth. Her first day, a nurse named Clara brought her tea laced with sedative. Liala drank it, smiled. By nightfall, Clara was vomiting blood. Liala had merely touched the leaves in the corner of the yard, nightshade, common, overlooked. Just enough to prove she was not to be underestimated.
Days bled into each other, but Liala marked time with knotted threads torn from her hem. She listened to voices, learned names, studied the order of the doors that opened and the ones that never did. She found the cracks. She always did. James returned to Parliament, hollowed. He answered questions, signed papers, gave speeches. But every word tasted of ash. Every room echoed with her voice. He visited the garden, now untended again. The roses had bloomed strangely, brighter, redder, as though watered in blood. Then he found the letters, hidden in a book she'd left in the study. Letters she had written to her sister, each sealed, each addressed, none sent. He found the physician's signature on a bribe receipt tucked behind a mirror in Clarissa's room. He found her necklace in the fireplace, burnt, warped, and he found fury. He arrived at the asylum with 2 barristers and a writ. They tried to delay him. He pushed past them. Doors swung. Nurses fled. He found Liala in the courtyard, standing barefoot in frost, her eyes lifted to a sky she couldn't see. A patient beside her wept over a broken bird. Liala was feeding it crumbs, singing something low and wordless. James fell to his knees. "I was wrong," he said, "and you never needed me to be right. Only brave." She did not cry. She only held his face and said, "We will not go back there. Not as what we were." He nodded. "As something new, or not at all." They left together, with papers signed, with eyes watching, with silence loud as thunder. Clarissa was waiting at the estate gates when they returned. She wore her morning gown. Her hair was perfect. James did not look at her. Liala did. "You built a palace of control," Liala said. "But even palaces burn." Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "And what will you do, girl? Light the match." "No," Liala said. "I'll plant something that grows beyond your reach." They left that night. Left London. Left title. Left scandal and silence and legacy. They traveled west, then further, until cliffs met sea and land forgot their names. There, in the misty coast of Cornwall, they built a house of wood and stone. No servants. No portraits of dead men. Only roses. Wild climbing, untamed. Liala planted seeds in soil soaked with stormwater. James carved each doorframe with old Romani symbols. They sang by firelight. They healed, slowly, unevenly, but truly. And sometimes, when the wind came low and sweet across the moors, Liala would walk to the edge of the cliffs and whisper, not a curse, not even a memory, just a name. And the sea, cold and merciless, would take it. The storms had changed by the time spring settled along the Cornish coast. Where once the rain had come with fury, it now arrived in soft pulses, draping the cliffs like morning veils. The sea no longer screamed, it whispered, and in a garden fed by frost and fire, roses bloomed redder than blood. Liala walked barefoot through the tangled rows, a knife in one hand, pruning thorn from thorn. The salt air stung the cuts on her fingers, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was real. Not a dream conjured in a London parlor or a case file in a doctor's hand. Behind her, their cottage exhaled smoke from the chimney. James stood at the doorway, watching her, a mug in his hand, the steam curling like ghosts around his face. His hair had grown longer, unkempt, a man no longer ruled by mirrors or polished marble halls. But the lines around his eyes told a truth he could not shake. The war inside him was not yet over. He stepped down the path, boots crunching gravel. You didn't sleep again. Liala didn't turn. The wind was speaking. Did it say anything new? It remembered her voice. James stiffened. The wind always brought back something. The slam of a carriage door. The whisper of silk behind locked rooms. His mother's perfume, jasmine and judgment, sometimes still lingered on the edge of his dreams. She's gone, Liala. Liala sheared off a dead rose head with a flick of the blade. Not for me. They sat by the fire that night, silence thick as wool. Liala stitched a torn shawl on her lap. James watched the flames. He finally spoke. I saw the notice in the papers. Liala looked up. She's taken in Lady Helen as a ward. The girl I was once meant to marry. He chuckled bitterly. That poor girl doesn't know she's just another pawn in the game. Liala set down the thread. She's bait. James frowned. For what? For your return. He stared into the fire. The idea had slithered into his mind before. Clarissa would never relinquish control while breath still filled her lungs. She hadn't lost. She had simply retreated, waiting, rebuilding. We left everything behind, he said, but she's still writing the ending. Then perhaps we must write a new chapter, one she cannot erase. The days grew longer. Letters arrived from London, none welcome. One came from an old schoolmate, hinting that James's absence was becoming conspicuous. Another bore Clarissa's seal. He didn't open it, but the third came with no return address, sealed in wax the color of dry blood. James slid it open with a dagger. It was a summons. Clarissa was dying, or so the letter claimed. The house in Grosvenor Square stood as it always had, immaculate, towering, suffocating. They arrived at dusk, unannounced, and were let in without protest. The butler did not blink upon seeing Liala, though the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed the years of whispers and silence. They found Clarissa in her room, gown pressed, hair coiled, eyes sharp despite the pallor in her cheeks. You came, she said, voice weaker than they remembered, but no less dangerous. You called, James replied. Clarissa's gaze fell upon Liala. Still walking on roses, I see. Liala stepped forward. Still pretending you planted them. Clarissa smiled faintly. I had my reasons. You had your fears. And fears make mothers of us all. James approached the bed. Why summon us? Clarissa exhaled slowly. Because I cannot die knowing you still think me a villain. Liala tilted her head. Are you not? Clarissa chuckled, then coughed, a dry, brittle sound. I did what I thought right. For the family. For James. You were a wildfire. He was dry grass. James clenched his fists. You tried to break her. Clarissa met his eyes. And she didn't break. Perhaps I was wrong. Liala narrowed her eyes. What do you want? Clarissa looked at them both, long and quiet. I want you to take the estate. You are my son. You were always meant to inherit it. No, Liala said, voice sharp. You're not giving it. You're baiting him. Clarissa didn't deny it. James turned away, staring out the window. The same gas lamps, the same streets, the same shadows. He remembered the halls, the quiet cruelty of dinners, the ghostly tread of Clarissa's ambition pacing through corridors. He remembered Liala, locked away, her fire dimming, her voice cracking, but never breaking. He turned back. We don't want the estate. It's yours, Clarissa said. Regardless. No, you wanted to stay yours. Through me. Clarissa's fingers clutched the bedsheets. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then let me tell you something before I go. Something no one else will. James waited. Your father, she said, did not die peacefully. He stiffened. He was poisoned. Slowly, over months, by someone who wanted the estate for themselves. I stopped it. I kept the family intact. You call me a monster, but I fought monsters to keep your name from the gutter. James stared at her, heart hammering. Liala stepped closer. And now? What monster are you protecting us from this time? Clarissa closed her eyes. The one waiting in the next room. They turned as the door creaked open. A man stepped in, tall, lean, with the same steel-blue eyes as James. A cousin, a former ally of Clarissa's, now executor of her will. He smiled too politely. Mother's told you, I assume? Told us what? James asked. That upon her death, everything passes to you. And should you refuse, it passes to me. James stiffened. You're here to collect. I'm here to ensure the transition is smooth. Liala took a step forward. And if we refuse, then you go back to your roses, he said, and we return this house to what it was. Before the scandal, before her, Liala stepped closer. Try. He smiled, but something in his posture shifted. Less cousin now, more vulture. This place remembers things. Names. Stories. Reputations. So do I, Liala whispered. Later that night, Clarissa passed. No wailing. No drama. Just a breath that didn't come back. James stood at the foot of her bed, unmoved. Liala closed the woman's eyes. She hated me, Liala said quietly. She feared you, James replied. She knew what you were. A fire. No, he said, voice steady. A mirror. And she couldn't bear what she saw. They left the next morning. They did not take the estate. They did not fight the will. But before they left, Liala walked the halls one last time. She whispered names to the walls. She pressed her fingers to the wood where the paint still bore her blood. She scattered crushed rose petals in the conservatory. And when they reached the gates, she turned back and said, let it rot. They returned to Cornwall. And there, among the thorns, Liala planted one final rose, jet black, bred from her own design. A rose that would never be trimmed, never bow, never bend to frost or fire. James held her hand. She leaned against him, and the garden like memory bloomed